Hello and welcome to Amateur Radio Topics. I'm Kevin, VK6T, and in this episode, just mainly like to talk about CQ Worldwide, a lead up to it, band conditions, that sort of thing. My preparation for CQ Worldwide was somewhat disrupted with an antenna problem. I had a winch cable break on one of the telescopic towers, so that basically changed the options for me leading up to the contest. I didn't really have an HF beam. I was looking at doing maybe a single lot, 40 metres, or single band somewhere else. But in the end, I decided to rebuild another antenna on the second tower I have. The antenna with the winch cable failure, that's going to have to wait until I can actually do some welding in situ, which for here in Western Australia, that's a job for winter. Can't really get out there and do anything in the summer months. So I have a few issues there to sort out with the tower sections, but it's not insurmountable. Some welding and some new tubing, and it'll be right to go again and revisit the winch cable. These things happen. So essentially, I decided to rebuild another antenna onto the second tower, but I didn't have really a great deal of time to do it. I had probably a bit over a week. And the other thing that was a slight problem is we had sort of a week of 39, 40 degrees centigrade maximum temperatures. So not ideal for working outside. Some very early starts, trying to beat the sun. I couldn't really, for various reasons, I couldn't really put the HF beam back up onto the other tower. The beam had got damaged when the winch cable broke on the first tower. So I had to think of something else, something that was going to give me some gain and be directional on the HF band to be fairly competitive. So I've had some success with an antenna which is loosely called an X-beam. So it's it's 4 wires, and it comprises of a driven element and a director. And each section of 2 wires can be selected either as a driven element or a director with relay switching. So effectively it looks like a cross, looks like an X. You can switch it in 4 directions. It's got some gain, it's got some front to back, it's got fairly good front to side. And I use one on 40 metres and it works quite well on 40. It's probably not as good as a full-size 3-element beam 100 feet, but it's okay. It's quite a competitive antenna on 40 metres. So I've been using that for a number of years, and it's sort of useful because it will sit under a beam or whatever, and not really have to, it doesn't take up too much real estate. And it can be rotated, of course, electronically with the switching of the relays, which is quite useful, nice and quick. So I modelled that up on NEC, and I had a look at how that would be for the HF bands, and it's pretty good for 2015 and 10, but it's probably not as good as the spider beam I had, which was 3 elements on 20, 3 elements on 15, and 4 elements on 10 at about 24 metres high. That's a fairly good antenna. So the 2-element X beam didn't really stack up in that regard. It was just a bit short on gain, and probably angle of radiation wasn't as low as what I'd like it to be. So I had an idea about phasing or stacking 2 X beams, one above the other. So I modelled that on NEC, and it looked pretty good. And eventually, I thought, well, I've got limited time here. This is probably an antenna I can build inside a week or so and get it onto the tower and get it all sorted. The figures on NEC look good. I mean, by stacking the 2 X beams one on top of the other, it gets rid of a lot of the high angle radiation and leaves you with a nice front lobe, which is it is low. I mean, on 10 metres, the X beam with the top antenna at around about 24 metres, the angle of radiation is about 5 degrees maximum. So, and the gain was pretty good. It was about 13 dBi, which is comparable with the spider beam. And I get to switch in 4 directions and a flick of a switch from the shack without having to use a rotator. So from a contest perspective, that's actually quite useful because the rotator gets a real workout in the contest, and you inevitably end up, working stations off the back of the beam and that sort of thing, and you think, well, I really need to turn the beam, and because it doesn't happen. So, all of that looked good. But I wanted to do, obviously, an X-beam for 20, an X-beam for 15, and an X-beam for 10. And so we'd stack in 2 over 2 over 2, or 2 over 2. I end up with 6 antennas. It's a lot of wire, and it's a lot of sort of configuration to try and get it right. So after doing a little bit of research on this, I decided to use 50 ohm feeders to each of the antennas. I needed to build 6 switch boxes. It's not so easy to say. And I did that, got some relays, built those boxes. It was all fine. And then I needed to feed each element with, or each pair of elements with exactly the same length of 50 ohm coax, which in my case I was able to do. Enough coax here to do that. Used a low loss RG213 type coax in order that I could get those coax feeds down to the bottom of the tower. So once we're at the bottom of the tower, then both of those feed into a T junction, and then from the T junction, I've got actually that's not quite correct. When they get to the bottom of the tower, they both feed into a 75 ohm quarter wave matching section. So the 75 ohm quarter wave matching section is quite important because the feed point, if I just join the 250 ohm coaxes together, I end up with halving the impedance that the transmitter is going to see. So I end up probably a 2-to-1 SWR, which is not ideal. By going into a quarter wave of 75 ohm matching section, that fixes that, and I end up with a nice 50 ohm match at the end of the coax. So it's quite important. So yes, first of all, the 50 ohm goes into a 75 ohm quarter wave matching section, and then that goes into a T section, and then from the T section onwards, it's 50 ohms all the way back to the shack. So that all worked out well. Managed to get all the switch boxes connected up. Mounted everything on the tower. So I had the top 3 beams, 20, 15 and 10, up at around about 24 metres. And then I had a 15 and 10, another 2 beams at 15 and 10 lower down, which were obviously stacked. And they were down at, probably about 18 metres, so a bit of space there. And then at the 12 metre level, I had the 20 metre beam. So 3 beams at the top, and then I had the other beams spaced out underneath. Now, the distance when you're trying to phase these antennas up is quite interesting when you model it on NEC, because it's not that critical. You need at least somewhere between half a wavelength and a wavelength distance between the beams. The problem that you've got is that there is mutual interference mutual interaction between the beams anyway, and then obviously you're phasing up as well. So the idea is you're trying to get 3 dBs maximum gain by phasing these up. Now, I don't really think in the real world that's probably practical. It looks practical in NEC. You can probably configure it and get your 3 dBs, but in the real world it's probably going to be slightly less than that. But the big plus on all the radiation patterns was that you pretty well completely lose all the high angle radiation. It all gets squeezed out into low angle radiation, which obviously, if you're living in VK6 and you're trying to run a contest, that's exactly what you need, because just about every QSO that I make in CQ Worldwide, or any other contest for that matter, is a DX QSO. I mean, there's a few QSOs with VKs and whatever, but in CQ Worldwide they count for nothing other than a multiplier score. So you really need a DX antenna. It's no good having an antenna that's got high angle radiation. It's really not going to do you much good. Not on 20, 15 and 10 anyway, and not if you want to be competitive. Anyway, managed to get all this rigged up. There's a lot of wire, as I say, going everywhere. I had a spreader system set up at the top to try and manage the wires for the 3 top beams, and the lower beams. I just spaced out the control boxes slightly. I had them on the top of each telescopic section, so that I could try and just manage those wires. Probably underestimated how much wire and rope and whatever that you end up having to manage, but the antennas or the tower's got guy ropes on it as well. etc. But anyway, worked hard on that during the week. Got to the Friday, the day before the contest, and the antenna still wasn't up. It still wasn't quite ready. My wife Julie came out and gave me a hand that day. It was 39 degrees centigrade maximum. It was a pretty horrible day. We worked all day on it. It wasn't fun at all, trying to get this antenna up, but kind of reverted in the end to doing things in what I would term field day spec. In other words, if it's good enough for field day, well, it's good enough for the contest, and that's how it's going to be, with the idea that, if this whole thing works, then I can always take it down and tidy it up a bit and make it into something that's a bit more permanent. So it's a bit of a test. I haven't seen any other documented publications around showing people trying to stack two X beams or anything of that nature. But so it's a little bit unusual, but I had an idea that it may just work out okay. So we worked hard all that day. I think I finished stringing out wires and getting antennas sorted just as it was getting dark. I finished off all the cabling and the routing of the switch box cabling and the coax and whatever in the dark. Probably by about 11 o'clock that night, I was pretty well done. I thought, yeah, I've got all this ready. I can start a contest in 9 hours' time. So it's cutting things a bit fine for CQ Worldwide. My aim was to do single all band, as I normally do in CQ Worldwide. So did a quick test on the bands with the stacked antennas. Flick around, had front to back, seemed to have some gain. Certainly good front to side on all three antennas. So I thought, yeah, this is promising. I had a good match. The match was under 1.5 to 1 on all three bands in all directions. So it's great. Really happy with all of that. Checked out the 40 metre antenna that I also had on the same tower. A 40 metre X beam, which was probably around about 22 metres high. It was between the two sets of stacks for the HF beams, and 40 metres was fine. That all seemed good. Had a slight adjustment in the direction of the 40 metre X beam and the X beam for the HF bands, just offset those slightly to try and counteract any interaction. Again, I modelled that on NEC, and that seemed to be the way to sort of get around it. Otherwise, the 40 metre beam seems to upset 15 metres too much. So a lot of wire up there, and also above that I had an 80 metre dipole and a 160 metre dipole up at around about 29 metres, close to 100 feet. So everything was good, and then I went through and I checked all the antennas. I thought I better just run a final check, make sure everything sounds good. Get to 80 and 160 metres, nothing, absolutely nothing. Thought, oh, this is no good. So I figured I've got some sort of problem with the feeder or whatever. Get out there with the torch. This is getting close to midnight by now, and had a bit of a look around. Couldn't really find anything. Couldn't find any dodgy connectors, anything like that. Replaced the coax run back into the shack from the 160 80 metre antenna, because I had a connector on the ground for that, so I could do that. I could just replace that section, and nothing, zero on 80 and 160. So couldn't really see any way around that. Around about midnight, I thought, well, I can't get the tower down. I can't really do anything with that. I haven't got enough time left before the contest actually starts. So I'm going to go and get some sleep and think about it and do something in the morning. So I got up and decided, well, that's it. I can't do single op all band. And got out there at first light, had a bit of a look, and did a few tests. Got the Rig Expert antenna analyzer on it, and no, I just had a complete open circuit on the 80 and 160 metre dipole, which are on the same feed line. The feed line runs up the tower and services both of those dipoles. So by this stage, the contest had already started. It was already underway, so I didn't really have an option to do an HF band. And I thought, well, I might just go and have a bit of a play around with the new HF antenna and just see how it works. Went off and had a coffee, came back and thought, well, what I might do is just get a bit of rest, because it had been a pretty hectic week. It had been a crazy week trying to get this antenna up, and a very big last day on the Friday. Get a bit of rest and then do 40 metres single band. Go back and do 40 metres single band, which for me here in WA, that starts at around about sort of like 4, maybe 5 o'clock in the afternoon, a couple of hours before sunset. And I've done 40 metres single band before, quite a few years ago, and it's not a bad contest to do, or not a bad band to choose for the CQ Worldwide. There's plenty of activity, and the 40mm X beam is quite a good antenna. So that's what I decided to do. Forgot about all the other stuff. Forgot about the HF bands. Just got on with it, and 40mm was quite good. I mean, I didn't expect too much for 40mm at this stage of the sunspot cycle. We've got high solar index. We got high. I think we had a pretty high A index. There was a disturbance over the weekend as well. But 40mm was okay. The band openings weren't as long as they were when I've done 40mm in low sunspot numbers. In other words, the band didn't open up as early, and it was once the sun came up in the morning, it was after about an hour it was done. But it was okay. I had a bit of fun. I think on the I can't remember quite what I got to on the first day. It might have been maybe 1,200 QSOs, I think, after the first 24 hours. And of course, it's not as tough as doing single op all bands, so I was able to get a bit of sleep. And then second day in, it's always going to be a bit slower, but it's not as slow as you might think, because 40mm is one of those sorts of bands where on the first 24 hours, obviously you work a lot of the biggest signals, biggest stations and whatever, and a lot of the small stuff just really doesn't get through, the next level down or the third level down of station strength. I've got two beverages as well that I was using on 40mm. I used those the whole time for the whole contest. I didn't listen at all on the transmit antenna. The beverages were fantastic. Really make a huge difference to trying to work a low band during a contest. So second night in was sort of going okay. The rates weren't as high as the first night, but there was picking up quite a bit of stuff. Got to around about 1,500 Zulu. Had about 1,500 QSOs at that point, which is not too bad. I was probably heading for maybe 2,000 QSOs, maybe 2,100, something like that. So that's okay for this stage of the sunspot cycle, I thought. And we had a local lightning storm come through, which was very close. It's up in the hills here, and pretty loud thunder and lots of lightning. And I thought, well, this is not great. I've got this 24-metre or 29-metre tower up there, covered in wire. And normally, if there's lightning, if it gets pretty close, I just disconnect everything and just wait. So I disconnected the feeder and just waited and waited. And a couple of hours later, the lightning was still rolling through, and looked at the lightning map and the forecast and whatever, and it looked like these lightning storms, these localised lightning storms, were sort of rolling through all night. So this is just not good at all. Didn't really feel confident about getting on there. Wasn't really worth the risk under the circumstances of trying to continue on. So I waited a bit more, and then eventually I fell asleep, and I woke up probably around about 5 o'clock in the morning, which is close to sunrise here. 40mm is pretty well done. So that was the end of my contest. I had to finish up early, unfortunately. But it probably wasn't worth taking the risk. I've worked through some lightning storms before that have got pretty close and probably risked it a bit. But in this circumstance, the storms were quite well, they're very close, and it's just not. Just isn't worth it in terms of trying to get a slightly higher score in the contest. So I finished up with about 1,500 QSOs. I think had about 90 something countries, 30 odd zones. So not a bad effort on 40s. It was quite fun. I really quite enjoyed it. And I've since taken the tower down. Taking the tower down, I'm going to rebuild some aspects of this antenna. But before I did that, I had about 3 or 4 days before I took the tower down, and I went on 20, 15 and 10, just experimented a bit with what this antenna would actually do, cranked the power back to 1 watt, and successfully worked on all 3 bands, successfully worked into Europe with just 1 watt of CW with that antenna. So that's quite a good guide that it's probably working okay. The front to back on all 3 bands was pretty good. It was probably the best on, I think 10 minutes had the best front to back, but it was good on the other bands. It was the front to back, generally speaking, was somewhere around, depending on the signal path and the band, it was somewhere between 20 and 25 dBs on all 3 bands. The interesting thing about it was that if there was a relatively local signal, like it was a VK signal, for example, and that wasn't so high angle, the beam didn't really show much front to back at all. The front to back was clearly shown on the long distance, the long haul stations, which is what is completely consistent with the modelling. So I had an interesting few days just testing it out, left it out for 3 or 4 days, ran some tests, thought, this is probably going to work okay, from the point of view of if I can work stations in Europe on 1 watt, and quite easily working them on 1 watt as well. It wasn't too much of a struggle in most instances on 2015 and 10, then this could be a good antenna. So whilst I'm waiting to fix the second tower, I will probably put this antenna back up. I'm going to fix a few things about it. I'm going to have a better spreader system at the top of the tower, so that the top X beam is completely self-contained. It doesn't have wires coming down into down to the ground I've got to manage, and the lower beams, the lower 3 beams, I can manage the wires from those okay. Tidy a few things up with it. But it all worked well. It worked well the modelling was good. The construction was tricky, but it worked. And the end result was probably what I expected. So, a 2/2 X beam. It's and it looked, the modelling was very consistent with what I had previously for the spider beam, especially on 10 metres. 10 metres was 4 elements on the spider beam, and the modelling on the 10 metre X, or the 2/2 10 metre X beam, very consistent with that. So if I can achieve that, and it's switchable in 4 directions automatically from the shack, then for me in a contest environment, it could be a better option. It gets rid of the whole rotator issues that you can have, and you get to be able to switch around very, very quickly from one direction to another. Had a bit of a look, after the contest was over, had a bit of a look at some of the scores that were posted, particularly single op, all band. Some fantastic scores. Dan N6MG, looks like he may have broken the CQ Worldwide all-time record for single op all band unassisted. I haven't checked it for a few days yet, but I guess he's going to have to wait for the log checkers to go through all of that. But he had a great score. So yes, certainly in terms of claim score, he's broken the record. Chris KL9A, who's down at TI7W, he had a fantastic score as well. I think he may have had a couple of problems towards the end of the contest, but he had a really good score. So they were 1 and 2. Dan was at ZF1A. So, and some other great scores in there. Yeah, a lot of guys running 2BSIQ. Seems to be what you need to be doing and how you need to be able to manage the contest now with that mode. And it's, as I've mentioned in previous podcasts, it's a bit of a journey. It's not quite so easy. You need to do a lot of practice. I listened to an interesting a YouTube video with Dan and Chris a couple of days ago, and they mentioned the amount of practice they were doing, and it's even the amount of practice they're doing and the style of practice they're doing is beyond a lot of operators. So what they're doing doesn't come easily, and I think it takes its toll, but it's the only way you're going to get those sorts of scores. And of course they've got the location. It's probably very much different trying to operate CQ Worldwide from the Central Caribbean than it is maybe from some other areas of the world. VK6 is probably a good example. A lot of stuff we're doing here with CQ Worldwide, you're working a lot of guys that are down in the noise. It's very weak signal type propagation, and it's not quite so easy to get those sort of conditions that you need to make it possible to do 2BSIQ for 48 hours or whatever, even if you could. So, but it's all good stuff. It's all good progress, and it's interesting to watch what these the top echelon of these operators can actually do, and it's pretty fantastic. Other news? Well, is there any other news at the moment? Probably not. That's probably about it from after the contest. The bands continue to be fairly good. It's good solar numbers. It's good for people who are interested in the HF bands at the moment. Activity's good, and I guess we press on to onto Christmas and the New Year and see how things work out. But I think we've got another few years of high solar activity. It's probably messed up 80 and 160 a little bit. Before the contest, I was doing some stuff on 160, and there were some really good openings actually on 160 prior to the contest. There were some nights where the signals were just great, S9 signals from the US. But generally speaking, the band openings were shorter, and it was kind of interesting. I could get on there 160 of an evening and work maybe 10 or 15 USA stations and maybe the odd JA. And the signals were all weak. They were all weak, sort of like 559 max, or somewhere between 339 and 559. Whereas if you go back maybe 3 or 4 years when the sunspot numbers are much lower, a lot of those openings would go on for longer, and a lot of the signals would be very strong during that opening. So there's been a couple of good openings during the sort of like the fall season through to now, but a lot of the openings have been very much weak signal work, and you need good antennas and good ears at both ends to do that. So that pretty well wraps up CQ Worldwide and contest conditions in 160 metres, and I'll look forward to bringing you my next podcast. 73s for now from Kevin, VK6 Lima Whiskey, and see you in the next contest.